Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil of 24/7 Sports Duck Territory, Autzen Audibles Podcast. We're welcoming in a guest today, Bud Elliott from the Cover 3 Podcast and 24/7 Sports as well. The man that's running and created the Blue Chip Ratio. We are having him on to come on to break down where Oregon sits because they're in a good spot, Bud.
They are. Oregon is like solidly top 10. Are they top 5 this year? I feel like it's just crazy how high they are on the list. And, Dan Lanning, I think we knew you could recruit to Oregon, but like Lanning and obviously the work that everybody has being on the same page here at Oregon is kind of kicking in another gear. I mean, this is really pretty impressive. And I made some comments on Cover 3 that like very quickly Oregon's going to have the second best roster in the Big Ten. And people are like, I don't know about that. Michigan just won the national title. I'm like, yeah, they did. That was last year's team. This is this year's team. So I'm really impressed with what Oregon's doing.
Ohio State's 1, Alabama 2, Georgia 3, Texas A&M 4, and then Oregon, you are correct, is 5.
Look at that. I mean, Oregon higher than like a Notre Dame and an LSU, a Clemson. That is rarefied air. Like Ducks have made the list before, but not this high.
Yes.
Hey, for starters, Bud, can you just give our listeners a breakdown of the origin of your blue chip ratio and kind of what you're trying to capture with it?
Sure. So a little over 10 years ago, I was working in recruiting, and I saw the types of players that certain teams signed. And I saw like national writers for whom I had really good respect, hyping up certain teams like a Wisconsin or an Arkansas, like they could win the national title. Like, what am I missing here? I'm at all these camps. I see the quality of body that Georgia signs or that Ohio State signs, and I see what some of these other teams sign. And guys, the gap is significant. And so I went back. I was like, what's like the worst you could do in recruiting and still win it all? And I just got lucky, honestly, that it came out to a clean 50% mark. So the blue chip ratio, you need to sign more 4- and 5-star recruits than 2- and 3-star recruits in the prior 4 years. It's almost been busted a couple times. Actually, the Mariota year scared the heck out of me for about 10, 15 minutes there in Dallas. The Clemson year where Nick Saban had the onside kick to beat Deshaun Watson the first time, that one came pretty close. I don't know if it'll live forever, but if you're picking a team to win the national title who is not on this list, probably not the best choice. Washington last year could have busted it, but instead, Michigan just beat them up. So
Oregon's in the top 5, 76% of its roster is a blue chip ratio. I believe they were at 67% the year before. It feels like the last couple of seasons we are seeing Oregon kind of make a jump from the tiers of this tier of schools. There's other levels, and it feels like 4 or 5 years ago they were at the bottom. Now they're, as you said, they're getting close to the top. Is that what you've seen from the data in the last couple of cycles that you've done this? And just what are your thoughts on just their meteoric rise here a little bit?
Yeah, I just think look, I mean, there are certain guys that Oregon has had who have shown you can recruit to Oregon, but I don't think anybody has done it quite like Dan Lanning has with their relentlessness. Although, I mean, Mario is obviously pretty relentless, but also I think with the organization and with the real plan. I think that's been sort of some of the beauty of what Dan Lanning's done. And obviously, like Oregon was at the forefront of NIL, and we don't have to dance around it, but you also have to do it the right way. You have to do it in a smart way, and you have to have a good working relationship between all parties involved. And it's pretty clear that Oregon has that. And Lanning's decision to stay at Oregon, I thought probably spoke volumes as well to a lot of these recruits that the Ducks are trying to recruit. I will caution, I'm not an idiot. Like, I don't think that having less talent is good. But last year, everybody told me, okay, only Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama can win the national title. I'm like, guys, history doesn't say that only the 80% teams can do this, right? It's 50% for a reason. Like, you have to get this certain minimum amount of talent through your door. And then what do you do with it, right? How's your player development? How's your coaching? How's your culture? How experienced are you? Last year, Michigan, you know what? You get that minimum level of talent through the door. You get a quarterback go top 10. You get a guy that almost won the Super Bowl as your coach. You get a bunch of dudes on your roster who are 23 years old. Like, that's a pretty good recipe. And like, so I do think there are a lot of teams that if everything clicked, certainly could win it. And I don't think Oregon has a better roster than Georgia, but I don't necessarily think you have to have like the very, very best roster in college football to win the whole thing. You got to have a certain level, though.
There's always luck involved in sports.
Yeah.
Of all degrees.
I mean, Phil Steele, 20 years ago, pointed out that the Oklahoma team that won the national title did not lose a single game from a starter to injury all year.
Yeah.
Like all 22 played the whole season, which is insane.
That's luck.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
But I'm curious, how has the transfer portal impacted you? Have you considered incorporating that data? Like, where are you at with that? Because I imagine some of these rosters, it's like 20% of it. There's 20% churn every year.
So, and obviously, like I went to Florida State for undergrad and ran a Florida State site for a long time. So FSU fans hate that I have not included the transfer portal data in this. I haven't for a couple reasons. One, the early data that we have so far suggests that you can get a lot of very good players out of the portal and some that'll be drafted in the back half of the draft, but you still don't get very many elite players in the portal. And that may be changing, right? And like, it's something, again, I'm just going to continue to monitor. And you can be a really good team with portal guys. Can you win a national title if like over half your roster is portal? I haven't seen anybody come close to doing that, right? For the most part, your very best players in the sport are still identified, signed out of high school. They're really good early on during the program. The collective pays them a boatload to not go anywhere else, right? That's just kind of how this works. I'm going to continue to monitor it. The other thing that I don't know is at what rate do transfer grades convert to draft picks, right? I can tell you with reasonable certainty how often a 5-star gets drafted and at each position and how often that 5-star, 4-star goes in the first round. With transfer ratings, I think across the industry, they're all over the board. And I think 24/7s are the best, by the way. Like, I don't actually use any other services transfer ratings because I don't know what goes into their process. Whereas I know our guys like ran personnel at Texas, and we have some guys who have been professional scouts working on the team. And even then, it's still really hard. So I need more years of transfer rating data to figure out like what the right blend would be if I did want to blend it in. I just tried like a straight mash it together this year, and I put it in at the end of the article you can find on CBS Sports. Most teams went down, which makes sense because most of your transfers are filling holes, right? For every Caleb Downs, there's like 4 or 5 guys you take who are, man, like I like this guy. He's 22. He's going to help us depth. We know he can play a little bit. FSU actually went up from 49 to 53, so that kind of speaks like maybe they're playing a different game than a lot of other folks, and I think they had more transfers drafted than like the next 3 teams of transfers combined. So maybe they are, but still, I think you still win national titles out of high school recruiting for the most part.
I feel like the 12-team playoff is really going to hammer home the value of being in this group because while the possibility of an upset now increases because there's just more games, the fact that there's more games, it's going to put a lot of attrition on the most talented teams. And someone like Washington last year, who was just unbelievable playing, this isn't 100% accurate, playing above their weight a little bit for some really short periods of time. That's going to be harder to get to the national championship now. Like, do you feel like this is going to even add more value to being in this list from the 12-team playoff?
I do. Let's take the TCU example, right? They run the table until the Big 12 title game. They lose that close to Kansas State. They pull the upset over Michigan. Now, look, they lost by 7 touchdowns to Georgia. I get that, but still, that result was probably an outlier relative to power rating stuff. Like the game was lined, was it 14.5, 15, or whatever it was, whatever the line was pregame, which probably has more predictive value, if you were to play it a bunch of times than how the game actually played out. But like, what if Georgia got food poisoning and the quarterback got hurt? We don't know how they're going to react, right? So let's say that happened and you'd already beat Michigan. You still need to win one more game now as a presumably pretty big underdog. So to your point, yes, like winning 3 really difficult games, or I guess 4, right? If you don't get the bye, is going to be really challenging.
But paint for our listeners the significance of being at 76% where Oregon is at. I know you kind of said 80% maybe is a cutoff for like the elites of the elite, but Oregon's right there. And just kind of outline, like, what does that historically tell you about teams when they have 3/4 of the rosters blue chip players?
I think it tells you that from a physicality standpoint, your practices are likely really good. I mean, just the whole iron sharpens iron thing. Think about it. There aren't many players on Oregon who are rated 3 stars who are not a kicker, punter, or long snapper, right? I mean, you can kind of just go through your head and think about it from the high school level. So when I watch Oregon, I'm like, okay, they are recruiting high school for the top end, and they're filling some of the depth stuff from when these guys don't hit via the portal. And I think that's really kind of the way to do it, right? Why would I take a high schooler who has a limited ceiling? I can ascertain floor more quickly from the portal or with more certainty than I can via high school, because that portal player is further along in his development. Like, I want to recruit high school with an eye towards the moonshots. Like, I want to recruit high school towards the idea of, like, if this guy reaches his maybe it's like 90th percentile projection, I can't go get that player in the portal. Or if I do, it's going to cost me $1 million, right? So I think it's super impressive to be up there at that 77%, especially because we know Oregon does not have friendly geography for recruiting. I mean, it's super impressive we're able to do that.
Yeah, Oregon, just real quick, looked at their 2022 class. They have 4 3-stars that they signed. Only one of them is on the roster remaining. And he's pushed himself into the secondary group of offensive linemen. So a guy that's, 2022 class, these are guys that should be playing college football now, wherever they're at. And they've only got one of them that's a 3-star prospect. Kind of sticking with that line, like, as you've done this, I don't know if anything strictly comes to mind right away, but just from where your perspective, when you're looking at these rosters, when you're watching these games, what's changed from a talent perspective at Oregon in the last 2 or 3 years? You feel like, is there a specific group that you just noticed, like, hey, the data shows they've got better here, or their eyeballs tell you they're better here?
I think that, like, where are the holes on this team?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, recruiting is sort of a percentages game. Like, you stack it, you make sure you have the proper depth in each position room, and then the odds say that it's going to work out. I mean, like, I don't really see holes. Like, I think when I look at Oregon, I'm like, okay, maybe not as many like first round type talents, although I think there are certain guys who certainly had that ability to ball out this year and get into that conversation. But, like, I mean, Dylan Gabriel is a super accomplished college quarterback. I just saw him throw out at the Elite 11. Like, is he a top half player on this roster? I mean, I think that says something if he's not, right? Like, he's a 23-year-old dude who's thrown for, 12,000 yards in his career, whatever he's thrown for. It's got to be up there. I just think the overall level of talent has increased quite a bit. I like the length that they have at offensive line a whole lot. And I think the diversity of body type on the defensive line is also really impressive. Like, they have different answers there. And I know that Mario did a good job recruiting that too at times, but I feel like the balance that Dan Lanning has achieved is better than what his predecessor had.
Probably wrap it there, Matt, because I think Bud's got time constraints.
Yeah. That's going to do it for us. Bud, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate your opportunity to break this down a little bit, get some more insight into why Oregon is so high on blue chip ratio. You can go to CBS Sports and read that 2024 story for this upcoming season and get all the data, all the information coming up. All right. We'll be back later this week with another edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later, folks.
Yes.